with my guy, Brett Siegel of Clutch Points. Brett, thank you so much for joining us, man.
Yeah, no problem, Alan. It's been a crazy week and a half, 2 weeks, going straight from NBA Finals to free agency to me losing my voice in the middle of all of it and trying to juggle all of that. So it's definitely been a whirlwind, that's for sure.
Well, let's start here. And I know everybody wants to talk about the Kuminga thing, but I'm going to tease them a little bit longer. What is going on? I know there was a little bit of talk with things needing to be made official July 6th. What is going on with the Dennis Schroder thing? And at what point do the Kings have to make a decision, or at what point is this thing going to be officially done? All we know is that Dennis Schroder will be in the purple and black next season, but we know nothing else other than that. What do you know about it?
Yeah, it's definitely a weird situation because it's kind of been going back and forth, where at first it seemed like this was going to be a sign and trade, then it wasn't a sign and trade, and then a few days later, all of a sudden, it again was a sign and trade, signaling from both sides that the Kings were going to be getting Schroeder sign and trade. They were going to be keeping their mid-level exception open and keeping some cap flexibility. And there wasn't really known at the time of what the Pistons were going to be getting. Were they going to be getting Malik Monk? Were they going to be getting another player? Were they going to be creating a player exception for themselves by trading out Schroeder? And that's kind of been where things have gone to this point. And now we're back at square one again, where we don't know if this is actually going to be a sign and trade. We can't get any confirmation from both sides, which means that they're still talking. And it's mainly the Pistons side of things. They're trying to figure out what exactly they want to do here, whether or not they want it to be a sign and trade to get that traded player exception or another player, or if they're just going to let Schroeder go and let that be the Kings' problem to figure out with their mid-level exception. So rest assured, Dennis Schroder is the newest member of the Kings. That deal's not falling apart, whether it's going to be a sign and trade or just free agency signing. He is going to the Kings. He's going to be their point guard moving forward. But there's still some details to be worked out here, whether or not this drags on into Summer League. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think we probably have a resolution here rather soon. But as far as a deadline, I personally don't know of there being any deadline of this having to get done. It's just one of those regular off-season things that teams will figure out, and ultimately there will be a resolution to it.
Talking to Brett Siegel, NBA insider for Clutch Points. All right, Brett, we've made people wait long enough. Give us your breakdown of what happened or is happening with Jonathan Kuminga. And I want you to just kind of specifically lay out over the weekend, how close did Kuminga conversations actually get to being done with the Sacramento Kings?
It wasn't close. It wasn't something that he was ready to sign on the dotted line and put pressure on the Warriors, either from an offer sheet or sign and trade where the sides were close. That wasn't anything, to my knowledge, of speaking with parties from the Warriors side of things, that was actively happening. There was an offer from the Kings. They had come and made it clear that they wanted to pursue Kuminga and that they were willing to do a sign and trade, but their offer, as it's been reported out there, of Devin Carter and Dario Saric, was very low compared to how the Warriors feel Kuminga's value should be if they are to deal him, because there's this common misconception out there that the Warriors don't want Kuminga back. That's not the case at all. There's plenty of people within that organization, and it starts at the very top of Joe Lacob, that would very much like Jonathan Kuminga to come back and be a featured player next to Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, and Steph Curry. They believe that he has the potential to be a star-like player in this league, and given that he's only 22 years old and he's only been playing basketball for 5-6 years, maybe 7 to this point. So he's still a young player that's developing, and that's not something Warriors fans want to hear after 4 years being in their system and all the lackluster production that there's been. But there have been a lot of good moments as well. And that's why there's still a lot of upside and belief from Golden State's side of things of not fully wanting to give up on Kuminga. And if they are going to give up on Kuminga, it's going to come at a price this offseason. And with him being a restricted free agent, they can control that. They have the rights to match any offer sheet that is out there. And it doesn't seem like that there's a huge market for restricted free agents right now. Everybody's spent their money. There's no money left. And even a team like the Kings, they're capped really on what they can offer Kuminga this offseason. So there was never a point where anything was readily available and ready to be moved in terms of sign and trades. There was heavy interest from the Kings. They engaged in serious conversations with the Warriors, but those conversations didn't last very long from Golden State's side of things. They weren't motivated by anything that the Kings were offering. And on the split side of things, Sacramento wasn't willing to even talk about what the Warriors were wanting in return. So as of right now, those talks have stalled. We'll see where it goes in the summer league because we're not going to have a resolution before then. Kuminga's camp and the Warriors and multiple teams are set to meet with one another, and we'll see how those conversations go on the concourse of Thomas and Mack Center in Las Vegas.
Talking to Brett Siegel of Clutch Points. Brett, I'm not saying that this is source information or anything like that. Just your opinion, looking at the package that the Kings offered and what you feel like the Warriors would want. Can you give us an idea of what a package would look like that the Warriors would want for Kuminga from the Kings?
Well, I can say it's sourced right here that they're going to want, and that's something that the Kings aren't willing to talk about at this time. They're not going to do a swap of Keegan Murray for Jonathan Kuminga. It's just out of the table for Sacramento. And quite honestly, the highest price in my mind that Sacramento is willing to go is to give up a player like Malik Monk, who they have been in active discussions with on the trade market all offseason. They've been looking at potential paths to move him. There was talk of him potentially being included in the Schroeder sign trade. That no longer seems like that's going to happen. So is there a potential path to give up Malik Monk and maybe a protected future first-round pick for Jonathan Kuminga? But again, it seems like a lot of value that Sacramento would have to give up for a player that many feel don't want to be back with the Warriors. So it's just a game of cat and mouse right now. There's a lot of he said, she said stuff about the Kuminga situation, but I can fully confirm that there are many within the Warriors organization that would like to bring him back. And if I had to give my best estimate based on where we're at in these talks right now, I'd probably lean like 70% saying that Jonathan Kuminga will be back with the Warriors next season. But what kind of contract that would look like, that's the big question. Is this going to be a 3-4 year deal, or is it going to be a quick 1 year, 2 year contract where they can bring him in, try to do something, and if it doesn't work out, flip him at the trade deadline? Because as we wrote about at Clutch Points in our latest intel story, the Warriors are still looking ahead to the future. They're looking at all these superstars that could potentially hit the market. There's talk of LeBron James with his future being uncertain, and we know that Joe Lacob has tried multiple times to bring LeBron to Golden State. There's talk of Giannis Antetokounmpo's future being uncertain, and we know how the Warriors feel about him as well. So if you can bring back Jonathan Kuminga, who's a 22-year-old with a lot of potential for growth, athletic forward, on a contract that's around $25 to $30 million per season, all of a sudden it opens up a lot of options for the Warriors, both heading into the trade deadline for superstars and even to expand their roster further if they decide that they want to move on from Kuminga and get 1, 2, maybe 3 role players to fill out their roster. So there's still a lot of options here that people don't necessarily realize. They think that's just we have to either sign Kuminga or sign and trade him. Not necessarily the case. It goes a lot deeper than that.
Talking to Brett Siegel of Clutch Points. Just a couple more for you on the Kuminga front, and then we'll move on. You brought up Malik Monk, and I know, again, it was a long weekend for me as well, so it all started Wednesday night. But the Malik Monk conversation that kind of kicked off before the official deal that got reported with Dario Saric, Devin Carter in 2 seconds, before that happened, we were hearing about Malik Monk, but was that the Warriors saying, hey, we'd be interested in Malik Monk, or was that the Kings saying we'd be interested in moving Malik Monk, or was it both, or was it neither? We just know Malik Monk got brought up.
To my knowledge, it seems like it's more from Sacramento's front, and I'm just kind of putting the pieces together there in terms of them talking with other teams this offseason about what a Malik Monk trade would look like. Are they interested in Malik Monk? They have engaged in conversations with other teams about Monk and what his value would be, but right now it doesn't seem like there's as big of a market for him just because of that contract. And it seems like that's been a major hesitance from many teams this offseason, not just pertaining to Monk, but NBA contracts in general. Teams don't want to take on these salaries where it's expanding 3-4 years from now, and Monk still has 3 more years left on his deal. Teams want optionality. They want flexibility, and that's why we're seeing a lot of these 1 year, 2 year contracts moved. And a perfect example of that is Michael Porter Jr., of him being moved to the Brooklyn Nets from the Denver Nuggets. Denver needed to make a move. They needed to try to get off money. And Michael Porter Jr., he has a $38 million cap hit, $40 million next year, but then that's it. He's going to be a free agent. So it's not much strain to an organization. That third year on some of these contracts, it's really looming large with this new CBA and the first apron, second apron tax rules. And teams just don't want to have to tie themselves down to those types of contracts now. So we're seeing a lot of those middle tier kind of Malik Monk contracts where it's not necessarily a bad contract in terms of his talent and what he can bring to a team. But when you look at the financial situations around the league and teams wanting to keep flexibility and not have to deal with the aprons, it all of a sudden turns into a conversation of this being a bad contract. And now teams are wanting more assets to take it on. And then you're basically facing a dead market at that point.
Talking to Brett Siegel of Clutch Points. Brett, we wake up this morning and you see Norman Powell is now a Miami Heat, which is a team that's been connected to both guys on the Kings and Warriors, Jonathan Kuminga and DeMar DeRozan. You woke up this morning and you see that Norman Powell is now a Miami Heat. Did you say to yourself, okay, the Heat, they're probably out on Kuminga and DeMar? Are they probably out on one instead of the other? What was your thought when you saw that deal done?
Yeah, so last night we actually did extensive reporting on Bradley Beal's situation with the Phoenix Suns about them negotiating and talking about a buyout. And I would expect something to come of light later today, more in the evening, of what is going to happen with the Suns and Beal, what kind of money is he going to be giving back. But everybody around the league anticipates him agreeing to a buyout. He's going to become an unrestricted free agent. And the Heat were linked as his top suitor simply because they've always had interest in him. Even before the Wizards traded him to the Suns, it makes sense of getting another star-like player, another shooter next to Tyler Herro and Bam Adebayo. But now that you add Norman Powell and you're tying yourself down to that first apron, because they're now hard capped at that first apron after trading Kevin Love and Kyle Anderson for salary cap matching reasons. And so they're about 4 away from that first apron hard cap. You have your full mid-level exception, but you can't use it now to bring in Bradley Beal, which was kind of the expectation there if they were to pursue Beal. So now they're tied down financially. It's hard to imagine that they're going to be front runners for Bradley Beal. It now looks like that kind of idea has shifted to the Los Angeles Clippers. But as we talk about the Heat, they're not going to most likely get Beal. They're most likely out of the Jonathan Kuminga sweepstakes. I wouldn't necessarily fully rule them out because they can still move contracts. You can still get another team involved to move Andrew Wiggins. You can still look to get off Terry Rozier's contract and open up some flexibility there. But again, they're hard capped at the first apron. If you're going to bring in Jonathan Kuminga on a contract that's around $30 million, well, you're going to have to free up around that kind of money. And it's just really hard to navigate that right now, given the Heat's financial situation. So I would most likely rule them out of both the Bradley Beal and the Jonathan Kuminga sweepstakes at this time. But there are some other moves that can come to the Heat. Obviously, we just talked about Wiggins and Rozier being on the trade block. There has been some interest in Wiggins around the league. I know that the Los Angeles Lakers have been mentioned by Clutch Points' Anthony Irwin, who's our Lakers insider, and they've had talks there. Maybe that's something that they'll revisit and maybe get the Utah Jazz back involved, who were just in that 3-team trade this morning. So there's a lot of options here that the Heat can explore, and I wouldn't expect them to be done building the roster just yet.
Talking to Brett Siegel of Clutch Points. Brett, and we can kind of separate the Heat, even though they were the main suitor for DeMar DeRozan. But with that being said, it is still connected. Does it feel like at this point you'd be surprised if DeMar DeRozan is not in the 916 in Sacramento by the time training camp and the season tipped off? Does it feel like DeMar DeRozan is going to stay out here in Sacramento?
Yeah, it's starting to look that way, isn't it? Because the Heat, we've talked about it multiple times, me and you, Allen, that the Heat were at the front of the line in those DeMar DeRozan talks, and that they were expected to once again possibly pursue him this offseason based on where their talks with Kevin Durant went and other stars around the league. But now they're hard capped at that first apron. To get DeRozan's $24 million contract, you're going to have to send out an equal salary right there. So again, Andrew Wiggins, Terry Rozier, this now becomes a multi-team trade. You're now moving picks that you don't want to move. So it just becomes a major headache for the Heat to try to figure out. If you take them out of the running for DeRozan, well, what other teams around the league could possibly be interested in him? We wrote about the Boston Celtics way before they made their moves with Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis. But after doing so, it doesn't look like that they're going to be in the running for a guy like DeRozan anymore. It does seem like that they're going to be taking a step back and committed to kind of retooling the roster and see what works once Tatum returns. And then you look at the rest of the East, it doesn't really seem like that there's another team other than the Milwaukee Bucks that would really make sense for DeMar DeRozan. But they've been doing their own cap room there. They've been kind of moving salaries around. They just got Miles Turner, and now they're kind of tied down with what they can do. other than moving Kyle Kuzma at this rate. So I don't think that's going to be of much interest to the Kings. I don't think that they would accept a Kyle Kuzma, DeMar DeRozan swap, even though they've had previous interest in Kuzma in the past. So it does seem like that the market on him has dried up a lot, and there will be a lot more information on that after Summer League, after we can talk with people and talk with the teams, kind of get an idea of where they're at in this offseason. But it wouldn't surprise me if he was back with the Kings in camp, and maybe he becomes a trade deadline piece that they look to sell.
Yeah, we discussed the Bucks and DeMar DeRozan last week. I think if I'm the Kings, I probably want something else back. And then if you're doing the Kyle Kuzma deal, but then if you're the Bucks, you're saying, hey, he had a kind of rough go with us, but it's still a pretty good contract. So you're kind of buying. It seems as if both sides, they could make the swap and say, hey, it's all fine, all good. Or they could say, and this is what we feel like with DeMar DeRozan, we don't think we're getting value, so it makes more sense to just hold on to him and see what happens there. The last one for you, Brett, just in terms of, I feel like we're not far away from, hey, let's see what happens at the trade deadline. What makes the trade deadline different, if at all, to where some of these guys like a DeMar DeRozan, and I don't want to keep throwing Malik Monk's name out there, but any of these guys on any of these teams, what makes the trade deadline different than right now with how teams are willing to kind of move and groove and get things done?
It's definitely a sense of urgency type of thing. Yeah. And when some of these teams are in the middle of the season and they see their counterparts or rivals make a move, all of a sudden their thinking shifts and we start seeing them be more aggressive. And we saw with the Luka Doncic trade at the trade deadline, and obviously that's something no one saw coming, and it's much different than us talking about DeMar DeRozan potentially being moved. But just one move like that can really send ripple effects throughout the league of teams realizing, hey, we have to make a move now. And when that team makes a move, now the team below them in the standings, who's 1 or 2 games back, sees an opportunity where if they potentially pursue a guy like DeMar DeRozan, maybe that pushes them into the playoff picture, and that helps them achieve their goals this season. So that's kind of where the trade deadline has shifted from the offseason, where it's more urgent. It's more teams that I wouldn't say they're necessarily willing to go into the tax space and first apron, but they have more flexibility given that they've already seen their guys play for 30, 40 games this season. And they have an idea where their roster is at and who can potentially be moved, who doesn't fit in anymore. Guys get injured. And a perfect example of that is the Warriors. When they got Dennis Schroder, they were able to give up DeAnthony Melton, who was a player that they didn't want to give up, but he tore his ACL. So he's basically a dead contract at that point. You can now move dead money to the Nets, who are in no point to contend, and get a guy like Schroeder that ultimately led them to getting Jimmy Butler. So there's definitely moves like that can be made, and we don't want to talk about it, and we don't wish this upon them at all. But let's say there's a scenario where DeMar DeRozan gets hurt for the Kings, and maybe they want to use that contract to go out and get something else. So there's just a bunch of options that present themselves to these organizations at the trade deadline rather than in the offseason right now, where they're building their roster, they have it kind of formulated, and then they're going to go into the season, see what works, and then make a final decision at the trade deadline.
Brett Siegel, great stuff as always. You're going to be out there for Summer League?
Absolutely. I'll be there for the whole week.
Okay, well, I'll be out there for a couple days, man. Let's link up and have some fun out there.